Sometimes a movie can include a scene or a moment that, while not derailing the whole thing, can take on larger significance than the filmmakers ever intended. Sometimes a small mistake or strange creative decision takes on a life of its own, creating a level of annoyance nobody expected. And with that in mind, I'm Josh from Whatculture, and today we're talking about the most unreasonably annoying moments in recent movies. First up, Orm's Cockroach Burger, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. After the announcement that James Gunn and Peter Safran would be heading up the new DCU in 2022, the DCEU came to a close in 23 with little to no fanfare. The franchise released 4 movies in 23, and though Blue Beetle will continue on through to the DCU in some degree, Shazam, The Flash and Aquaman, or at least these versions of them, will be left behind. The final entry in the DCEU was Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, and though it was nowhere near as bad as Shazam, Fury of the Gods or The Flash, it was as forgettable as the first Aquaman, only far less profitable. What it did do, though, was afford the DCEU a chance to sign off. It was a clear jumping off point that could have put something of a full stop or an exclamation mark at the end of the final chapter. The scene that was chosen to do this, though, well, it was a post-credit sequence in which Orm ate one bite of a cheeseburger, then added a cockroach before taking another. Granted, it's not like the film was ever going to give fans anything like Deadpool and Wolverine's tribute to Fox's Marvel movies, but there's going out with a whimper, and then there is whatever this is. The scene, as you might expect, was totally inconsequential, and it made no real difference, but this is how the DCEU bowed out. Next up, Cobra Bubbles, Lilo and Stitch. As with most reboots and remakes, the live-action version of Lilo and Stitch changed a lot about the story and several of the characters. One who suffered from this more than almost any other character was Cobra Bubbles, now played by Courtney B. Vance. The character was changed from a former CIA agent turned social services worker to a reduced role as an active CIA agent going undercover as a social worker. Fans of the original were naturally annoyed by the change, as with others in the film, but this wasn't even the worst part. See, in the original, a joke is of course made about how such an intimidating figure has the name Bubbles, while also having Cobra tattooed across his knuckles. It's funny, but instead of this in the remake, the character was just introduced as Cobra Bubbles like it was a normal name. There was no comment about it and kind of no joke, just everyone acting like they'd just been introduced to John Smith or Josh Brown. And yes, it's small, but again, it's proof that these remakes of classic Disney animations do nothing but strip back the fun of the originals. Next up, one of my personal favourites, the atrocious ADR, Madam Web. Look, Madam Web is not a good movie. It has plenty of issues story-wise to get mad at, and arguably misleading marketing that put the emphasis on elements like the Spider Women that barely showed up in the movie at all. All of that begets reasonable annoyance as a paying customer who watched this superhero travesty like myself. But one element that might trump all of those on the annoyance scale is just how terrible the ADR is. Now, if you're unfamiliar, ADR is essentially dialogue recording that's done after the film has already been shot. Lines will be tweaked or newly inserted, and the movie will try to hide that it wasn't done on set by not having the character on screen when the line is said, or quickly cutting away so you can't tell that the words don't match their lips. And I am not joking when I say that half of Madam Web's dialogue feels like it was ADR. Characters clearly aren't saying what their mouths are indicating. Huge exposition dumps are clumsily cut over footage that barely connects to it, and worst of all, the ADR recordings themselves sound far worse than the dialogue captured on set. And once you notice it, it'll drive you absolutely insane. Next up, Rocky's Omission, Creed 3. A slightly different entry now, as this isn't an irritating moment, but rather an irritating omission of a moment. Almost 50 years after Rocky Balboa burst onto the scene in 1976, Creed III became the first film in the franchise to not feature Sylvester Stallone. Though Adonis Creed giving Damian Anderson a chance at the big time was inspired by what Apollo did for Rocky way back when, Rocky's name was only mentioned once throughout the entire movie. The man himself, however, remained absent without so much of an explanation as to why. With his health issues in Creed and after reconnecting with his son in Philadelphia in Creed II, it would be understandable that Rocky wasn't going to be around in LA and would have nothing to do with training Donnie for his big fight against Dame. It's also been widely reported that Sylvester Stallone wasn't happy with the direction of the series and so stepped away entirely. However, even after all that, it just felt kind of strange having a movie set in the Rocky universe, especially when this spin-off had already featured him so heavily, and have him just not show up. Surely there could have been some way to bring him in, even if it was just a cameo appearance watching the fight, either in the Dodger Stadium or hell, just at home. Next up, one that is definitely sillier, a pretty tame, deep, dark secret, Inside Out 2. Things have been a little rough for Disney Pixar over recent years, with a run that has struggled to make either critical or commercial waves since the release of Toy Story 4 in 2019. The sole exception to this, however, is Inside Out 2. Releasing in 2024, the sequel was easily the studio's best in years, and in earning $1.6 billion at the global box office, became Pixar's highest grossing film of all time. There's not much to criticize when it comes to the film itself either, although its post-credit scene gag didn't work for some. See, earlier in the story, while Riley's emotions were locked inside her memory vault, they met her deep, dark secret. It wasn't explained exactly what said secret was until the post-credit scene, in which it was confirmed that Riley burned a hole in the rug. Some viewers found this as an underwhelming reveal, coming as an anticlimax after having waited until the very end of the credits to get this information. The film even acknowledges this through Joy herself though. There were plenty of other directions the story could have taken with this secret, and it does ultimately reflect that a young Riley likely would have thought something as mundane as a hole in the rug was the worst thing imaginable. Next up, Laura's changing accent, Deadpool and Wolverine. Deadpool and Wolverine brought more cameo appearances than ever before to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The likes of Johnny Storm, Elektra, Blade, and a smattering of X-Men villains were all brought back for the first time in years, sometimes decades. But the character that changed the most was arguably Laura. Daphne Keene's character had last appeared just 7 years earlier in Logan, but in that time had grown up from a child to an adult. She remained just as badass as ever, and though kept her pink sunglasses, she had somehow lost her Mexican accent. Now, in The Void, it could have been possible that this was simply a different variant of X-23, but since it has been confirmed that this is in fact the very same version that audiences saw in Logan, it begs the question, why did her accent change so much? In that same breath, Keene explained that Laura's accent had gone because she had been spending time in America for a while now. But if this is the case, why didn't she develop an American accent rather than something closer to Daphne Keene's natural English accent? It absolutely does not affect anything within the plot of the film, and Keene gives an absolutely amazing performance returning to this role, and it absolutely is nitpicking at its finest. But it does feel as though this was a character detail that was overlooked and then tried to be explained away later. Next up, leading with two mortals, The Old Guard 2. It is too often forgotten that movie characters aren't perfect. They aren't always going to make the best choices. They won't always be as smart as they need to be. And sometimes there are certain things that audiences would have done that weren't even considered on screen. And these aren't plot holes, they're imperfect characters behaving imperfectly. However, there is of course a limit to this. You could forgive them for not coming up with what would have been a winning idea, but sometimes there are moments of sheer stupidity that just can't be overlooked. Take The Old Guard 2 as a great example. At the beginning of this sequel, Andy and her team head into a dangerous situation to recover some weapons, and choose Andy herself as well as Copley to lead the charge. This, however, is easily the worst thing they could have done, and it's such a bad plan that it's kind of infuriating. That's because the team is primarily made up of immortal beings, but heading first into danger while the actual immortals just hang at the back are the only two people who could have died. Yes, Andy had her whole "I'm always first" thing going on, but there was literally no need for Copley to be there as well, let alone in the thick of it. As we said, characters don't always make the right decisions, but this one felt like it was a little bit too dumb to forgive. Speaking of out-of-nowhere silliness, next up we have the Power Rangers zombie attack 28 years later. I personally love 28 years later, but even I can admit that its final scene sticks out like a sore thumb. Though the main narrative ends on a satisfying and heartbreaking note, with teenager Spike setting out on his own path in a virus-overrun Britain, the film actually ends on a sequel tease, one that many thought would have been better left as a post-credit sequence. That's because after we've gone through the emotional ringer with somber, grounded character drama, the film then pivots to Spike encountering a group of new characters called the Jimmies, all dressed in colourful tracksuits and blonde wigs, evoking one of Britain's most notorious real-life monsters. And that's jarring enough, but then it cuts to the gang performing front flips and karate moves to kill the rage virus horde that's closing in on Spike. It feels like a complete break from reality, and although this group will be fully explained in the next movie, it didn't offer much for viewers of this film who left the theatre thinking that the scene had just destroyed the considered tone and goodwill that the previous 2 hours had built up. Next up, Celestial Island, Captain America: Brave New World. Much like Thunderbolts, Captain America: Brave New World acted as a sequel of sorts to multiple different franchises within the MCU. Of course, it was the fourth in the Captain America series, the first with Anthony Mackie's Sam Wilson at the helm, but it also brought back a lot of aspects from 2008's The Incredible Hulk, and it became the first film to reference the immersion of Tiamat during the events of Eternals. Though there was a blink and you'll miss it reference to the Celestials sprouting out of the Indian Ocean in She-Hulk Attorney at Law, this was the first real acknowledgement of one of the biggest events in the history of the planet in this universe. Typically, nations began to squabble over what to do with Celestial Island and the adamantium on it. But why was it called Celestial Island? The audience knows that the being is a celestial, but what possible explanation could there be for this becoming common knowledge within the realms of the on-screen universe? Don't get me wrong, there were multiple issues with the fourth Captain America film that stopped it from winning over even the most ardent MCU fans, and this certainly isn't anywhere near the top of that list. However, as the title of this video suggests, it is unreasonably annoying that there was no explanation given for how the general public came to understand that this is a celestial. And finally, Disappearing Dinosaurs: Jurassic World Rebirth. Jurassic World Rebirth didn't particularly offer anything groundbreaking or new to the franchise, however you could argue that it brought more to the table than any of the other Jurassic World films. That being said, there were still multiple moments that just didn't sit right. Case in point, visiting a new island gave the filmmakers the chance to show some never-before-seen dinosaurs, like the Titanosaurus, the Quetzalcoatl, this one, and the many hybrids that the island's experiments had created. On the other side of the coin, there was the entertaining and memorable return to the screens for the Mosasaur and the Spinosaurus. As the team set sail in the movie, they're attacked by the Mosasaur that they're targeting, as well as a group of Spinosaurus that ultimately kill 2 of the group. It was an extremely dangerous journey onto the island because of these animals, and not one that everyone survived. However, when the group were finally able to escape, they headed back into those same waters on a much smaller boat, and the monsters that had attacked before were nowhere to be seen. So it begs the question, did the writers just forget about the huge action sequence from just an hour earlier in the film? Why were they able to leave the island untouched when they had been attacked twice just trying to get in? So that's our list. Let me know in the comments if any of these moments got you unreasonably annoyed as well, and if there are any that I missed off here. And if you want to watch more videos like this, you can click one of them that should be on the screen right now, or head over to the channel for loads more content.